Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to go over the Motorola XTL 2500 and its interconnections. What do you connect to? How do you turn this thing on? And what to expect from it. Like I said, this particular version is the 2500. This is a UHF high power, 110 watts UHF. It is important to note with that we need to cover this right away. The antenna, you can forever and always only mount this antenna on the roof of your vehicle. Due to RF exposure, especially at UHF, mounting this to a trunk, a lip mount, anything like that is just unacceptable. So this absolutely has to get mounted to the roof of your vehicle. So now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and cover the cables you will need and where to connect. Okay, I kind of have to excuse the clutter here. There's a lot of equipment right here. Like I said in the previous clip, this is the 2500, XTL 2500. This is in what's known as remote mount configuration, and that is to say that this control head is mounted separately or remotely from the RF deck. Okay, and this is advantageous in this case because, as I said, this is the high power one. So this RF deck is quite large. And if we stand it up on edge and put my hand next to it, it's quite a hefty unit. You know, this weighs a few pounds, and you wouldn't want this floating around on or under your dashboard. So typically this would get mounted in an equipment rack in the trunk. You know, like on the Crown Vics, there's typically a pull-out equipment rack that comes out underneath the package shelf in the trunk area, and this is where this kind of equipment would be mounted. In my case, I have a four-door pickup truck. I put these behind the back seat, mounted up on the wall. Currently I have one in there now. I have a VHF. This exact unit here will be going into my vehicle this spring, summer, whenever the weather turns nice, because I want to have VHF and UHF digital capabilities out of my vehicle. I would imagine we'll probably go ahead and cover that when I do the installation on it. It's kind of interesting. Okay, so what do you need? First of all, you're going to need your RF deck. Okay, you're going to need your control head, obviously. This is the M5. Motorola has a few different variations of control heads, both in this form factor. They also have a handheld control head, which is, you know, it's a microphone-shaped device. It's pretty much takes the place of this entirely. You really only saw those in what they called stealth installations. You know, like the typically for federal agents and stuff like that, where you didn't want the radio equipment necessarily to be obvious, you know, to someone who was looking into the vehicle. Along with that, you have some stealth installation antennas. Those are worthy of the entire video because it's pretty fascinating how you can hide an antenna on a vehicle and still have fairly decent performance. Anyway, another tangent. RF deck, control head. Okay, now we need to connect these two since these are in remote mount. So we're going to use the CAN cable for Motorola. It will be identified by the blue ring as well as the blue interior. You see there's a triangular keyway, pizza slice shaped device in there. That way you cannot connect this into the wrong port on either the RF deck or the control head. On your RF deck, you're going to see there are two blue rectangles here. Okay, you can run these in dual control head configuration. You can also connect VIP or vehicle interface port devices through these. So that's why there's more than one. This here is just a rubber plug. You pop it out, just pull it straight out, and we'll uncover this other port. So in this case, we need to use this one we're going to take our cable here, line up our keyway, and we're going to plug it straight in until it clicks. Okay, so now our CAN cable is connected to our RF deck. We need to move on and connect the other end of this CAN cable to our control head. And on the back, you will see the same colored rectangles. Yellow one is for your VIP connection, vehicle interface port. This is for controlling external devices, horns, lights, lock solenoids, that kind of stuff. You have the option, you can do it from here. You can do it from here. You can also do it from here. And we will cover the VIP setup in a future video. To operate it from the control head, you will need this cable. As you can see, this connector, it's the same connector as the CAN cable, except it is a yellow ring and a yellow insert, and the key is in a different location. This breaks out to our spade connectors for connecting to whatever we want to operate. VIP software parameters are updated in the programming software. Like I said, we'll put a whole video together on VIP because it's pretty fascinating what you can do with this thing. So back to this. Yellow's for VIP. You have your two CAN connections, and then you have your red power connection, and we'll come to this in a second. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our blue CAN cable, and we're going to line up our keyway, plug it in until it clicks. Okay, so now our communication cable between our RF deck and our control head is now made. And it's important to remember that this is going to be installed elsewhere in the vehicle. This is going to be installed wherever the operator is, so this cable gets routed throughout the vehicle. Okay. You always want to make your RF connections and your communication connections first before you apply power to this. Obviously, you're going to have your power cables connected, but the very last step that you want to do is install your fuses, right? Just in case there's something that's wrong or whatever. Like in software, you don't want to connect your power cables and this thing immediately turn on when you don't have either your data cable connected or your antenna connected or whatever. So it's always safest to connect your data, your RF connections first before you apply power to the unit. So on the subject of power, we have our red connector here. Okay, this is for our power connector. So this will supply power to the control head only. Okay, we're gonna have a separate power feed for the RF deck because remember this is mounted. Remoted. Oh boy, this is mounted elsewhere in the vehicle, so it's going to have its own power feed. So this is for the control head only. We have a few different color wires. We have a red wire, okay. Now we have a couple different options here for power on and off. How do you want to control this radio? Typically, the most common installation is you're going to take this red wire and you're going to run it to a continuous battery positive power source, plus 12 volts in the vehicle somewhere. Your black wire is obviously your ground, so that's going to go to a common grounding point somewhere. Typically in an upfit situation where we're putting this in a squad car or something like that. We have some terminal strips in our build out where we would connect these two. Okay. For amateur radio, you can run these right to the battery if you wish. They do have fuse holders at the other end of them. They're just out of frame here, but they're really nice, rubberized, weatherproof, the ATO style blade fuse holders. So those you can run that right to the battery if you wish. In my own vehicle, I have a little bus bar underneath the dash that I run these to. It works good for me. The yellow wire is your ignition sense wire. Okay. If you don't want to have, okay, so what is ignition sense? First of all, ignition sense is the radio's ability to detect whether or not the vehicle's ignition switch or the key switch is on. Okay, so if you have 12 volts applied to the red wire, ground applied to the black wire, this is of course assuming your RF deck is already supplied with power. If at that point you apply 12 volts to this yellow wire, the radio will now turn on. If you remove 12 volt power from just this yellow wire only, the radio will turn off. This allows the radio to be able to retain its last used state, you know, what channel you're on, were you in scan mode, your volume level, etc., etc. If you're utilizing this yellow wire like that, you know, where this is the only switch source, your red wire is connected to continuous power, it never gets turned off. This radio will remember its last current, last used state, we'll say, and then next time you apply power to this yellow wire, the radio will boot back up into that same state. This is honestly the recommended way to do it. It's the way I always install all of these. You can, of course, run this yellow wire directly to the same spot this red wire is, and then utilize the power button on the control head, so you can turn the radio on and off from there. One thing that's worthy of note, even if you are using ignition sense, and this is connected, and the radio is on, you can force it off with the power button and then turn it back on with the power button. You can change this in software a little bit in that you can check a box that says ignition sense input required. So basically that means that this radio has to see power on this yellow wire before you can turn it on from this button. If that box is not checked, you can force the radio on from the power button without the yellow wire connected. But I think, if I remember right, that overrides your auto power off, which you can set in here for how long this thing will stay on before it automatically powers off due to inactivity. So it's definitely something we'll look into when we do our more advanced programming on it. Okay, so so two other wires. You got two gray wires here. These are your speaker connections. It does have a label attached here, and the label says grounding speaker leads will damage audio circuit. Use isolation transformer for servicing. So as to say, if you were to take these wires and you were ground it, you know, the chassis ground, or touch them together or whatever, you will damage the audio output stage in this radio. So just take care. I have these speaker wires connected to a GE external speaker. You can get Motorola speakers, obviously. You can get whatever speaker you want to drive with this. You know, an 8-ohm speaker or whatever is perfectly acceptable. Like I said, I have one of these, the VHF version of this in my vehicle. I use the audio output stage of this, and I drive directly the center speaker in the dashboard, the factory speaker. So it makes for a nice clean installation. I don't have an extra speaker floating around in the cab somewhere. Okay, we've covered that. Now let's go ahead and connect it. Same deal. Red ring, red insert. You're going to take your key, you're going to line it up, look for your red rectangle, and then you're just going to connect it. Okay. Now we do not have power applied to these wires just yet. Okay, my power supply is on, but my wires are disconnected. We have two more connections we need to take care of, and that is on the back of our RF deck. So let's get this turned around. Okay, so we have our DC power here, and we have our RF coax mini UHF connector here. Those are the only two connections in the back of this radio that we need to worry about. So in this case, I got to spin this around because okay. Yes, I am aware I need to fix this end, okay? But this is connected to a dummy load here in the lab. So we're going to connect our mini UHF, just like that. We have our DC power for the RF deck. A red wire goes to a continuous battery B+, 12 volt source. The ground obviously goes to a ground point. Either running all the way back to the battery or your upfit bus bar, or however you are installing this. So now we can go ahead and connect this to the back of the radio. You just line this up and push it in like so, and the connection is now made. So let's spin this back around. Let's change your point of view here and see if I can get all of this in shot here. We'll be right back. Okay, now we've moved over here to the power supply. That way I can demonstrate some connections here. So the first connection we're going to make is our DC power supply to our RF deck. Okay, now this particular harness I'm using is not the correct harness for this particular RF deck. The correct one you should be using would be this one. It will have the same 20 amp fuse in it, obviously, but it is a much heavier gauge than this wire. Okay, this wire is used for the low power or the mid power dash mount radios. This heavy gauge wire is used for the split mount or the remote mount high power radio. It has the same connector, obviously, to plug into the back of the RF deck, and as I said, the same fuse. It's just a lot heavier gauge. And that has to do with current draw and voltage drop over such a long run of wire. Like I said, typically you're mounting this in the back of the car, and that usually is not where the battery is, unless it's a German vehicle, which oddly enough, in the service manual or the installation manual for these 2500s, they actually feature Mercedes. So it's kind of funny. Anyway, first connection we're going to make is the DC power for our RF deck. Okay, this wire here comes off and it goes down to our positive supply on our power supply. We are going to go ahead and make that connection now. As I said, we already have our RF connection and our communication connections done. We will connect that. I mean, it's a simple bullet connector here between the fuse holder itself and the rest of the wire run that goes up to the pack or the RF deck. So we're going to make that connection now. Okay, so the next step is to take our 20 amp ATO style blade fuse. We're going to go ahead and put our fuse in. The fuse is now installed, and now we can close our fuse holder. Okay, now it's important to remember that our RF deck is now live with power. So now our next step is we're going to connect DC power to our control head. So as I stated before, we have our power connector that comes from our control head. The black wire is going to ground. It's going to the same ground that my RF deck is going to. So now I'm left with the red and yellow wire. So I'm going to take our red wire and we're going to connect it to the constant 12 volt supply coming from the vehicle. This is equipped with a 5 amp ATO style blade fuse. It is very important, do not exceed these values, otherwise you will cause damage to the radio should something happen. Okay, so now we have connected our continuous power to our control head. But as you can see, nothing is happening. Our radio has not turned on yet because currently it's waiting for its ignition sense. As far as the radio is concerned, the ignition switch in the vehicle is off. Okay, so now we're going to connect our ignition sense. This one is equipped with a 3 amp fuse. You will either find a 3 amp or 4 amp, depending on reasons, I guess. Typically they're 3 amp ATO style blade fuse. Now when I connect these two wires, we have voltage applied currently. It will take a minute, but this radio will boot up and turn on. So there we go. We have made our connection, and now here in a minute we'll see our radio come online. Usually the first one takes a minute. Here we have our radio is now online, and we're currently on the this is the only channel that's programmed into it right now. So that's why it comes up on this one. So now the radio's on, you're driving your vehicle, you're using the radio, etc., etc. You get to wherever you're going, you turn your ignition off. I will simulate that by just disconnecting the yellow wire, and now the radio will turn off. And the current draw is extremely minimal on this when it's in this state. I've had these connected in vehicles which have sat for weeks and weeks and weeks and had no issue with this sitting in this current state right here. Turn your ignition back on. I've just reconnected the wire. Radio will boot up and turn on. Just like that. It is now ready to use. As you can hear, we heard the boot tone from our speaker, and like I said, the radio is now ready to use. Except for, obviously, we need a microphone. Okay, we got two different types of microphones here. We've got your standard poopy, average run-of-the-mill Mother Moto microphone. This is the HMN 1090 Alpha. It's a good microphone. It really is. They're pretty well indestructible. My favorite microphone, however, is this one, because it gives you some extra functionality. You've got all your buttons and stuff right from the microphone. This is the HMN Hotel Mic November 4079 Echo. Good microphone here. So we can go ahead and plug that in. And now our microphone is now lit up. And you can see it is the same color backlight as the radio itself. Now when we get into our programming, let's turn this light off here so we can see this. Okay. Hopefully you can see that a bit better now. There's still a lot of glare here. What was a good spot to... yeah, let me... 1 second. Okay, this is as good as it's going to get. I guess it's daylight out, and, well, this is going to get it. As good as it's going to get anyway. Okay. Color matches the display, right? And as I said, when we get into our more advanced programming, I'll show you how to change this. But right from the soft keys, we can go on the control head. We can select color. What color do we want? We'll go for green. We can go to amber. We can go to red. Let's just do green. Hit select. Our color has now been selected. And now when we power cycle our radio, it will come back up green. So that's kind of a neat little function of these. My plan is when I put this particular unit in my vehicle, the VHF is going to be on one color and the UHF will be on a different color. So it's a nice visual way to tell them apart, which is which, basically. So that, I believe, concludes how to connect your Motorola XTL 2500. Typically, you're going to put this into an NMO style antenna. I recommend the NMO style antenna over pretty much anything else, just because they're designed for this kind of stuff, right? It's a permanent installation antenna. I say permanent, you can't undo it. They make blanking plugs for them. I do advise taking care when you're installing an NMO antenna, because you do have to drill a large hole in your vehicle, and you just want to make sure that it is in a good usable spot. And when you do decide to revert to something else, you want to put a plug there, that once you install that plug, it's no longer visible. This is why I always advocate for, well, one of the reasons I advocate for always putting the antenna up on the roof of your vehicle. That way when you do switch back or take that antenna out, you put your plug in and you can't even see it from the ground. It's as if it wasn't even there, right? The other issue is RF exposure, especially with UHF. 110 watts at UHF. You do not want that antenna mounted on a trunk lid or a lip mount, or really anywhere near. You want to get it above, and ideally on the other side of that metal ground plane, which is the roof of your vehicle. Okay, you want to radiate that RF away from you, not make it bounce around inside your vehicle. So that's it, really. These are the basic connections for the XTL 2500. The same will apply to the 5000, the 1500, and a few other Motorola style radios like this. But we can cover that in a later time. So if you're interested in this 2500 series radio, or the XTL series radio, stay tuned, because the next step is we're going to go through programming. We're going to do a basic program in this. The bare minimum that you need to get this thing on the air and on a local repeater, both simplex and duplex, okay? So the bare minimum what you need to get this thing on the air. After that, we're going to go into more advanced programming. I'll show you how to set up some really neat features in this, how to set up the digital, the P25 side of it, and how to do your VIP, you know, your external control. So again, thank you for watching. My name is Alan. Remember, everybody is fighting a battle that you don't know anything about, so be kind. N0 ZFG out.